Hello, hi everyone. My name is Edward. I'm a US lawyer, so I'm not going to be speaking about any particular jurisdiction here, not about Thailand, although I do work for DFDL. I'm a consultant there. We have 10 countries, and my job is to coordinate the legal advice in particular with data protection among these 10 different jurisdictions. Disclaimer, of course, this is not legal advice. Like I said, we will not be talking about any particular jurisdiction in general, but I will be speaking about general concepts that apply broadly across most data protection laws. Okay, so why are we here? Mostly, people are concerned about one thing, risk, of course. Risk to your organization, and maybe more importantly, risk to you personally, right? Maybe you're a CTO or a data protection officer, or just a contractor. So compliance in this area involves every level, from the lowest contractor all the way to the highest management level. So what I hope to give you today is a broad macro understanding of data protection laws so that you can properly manage your risk. I'm going to try to minimize the legalese here, try to speak in plain English. And my goal is, at the end, you should not be this person where you don't know what you don't know. This is a dangerous situation to be in. If you don't know where to start, you don't know what questions to ask, this is where you get in trouble. So what is a broad understanding? What's this macro view? I'll give you an example of what it's not. So you have a company, and some lawyer somewhere drafted a privacy policy, and your webmaster installed a cookies widget, and you think, I'm done. Data protection laws, compliance done. Far from it. This is the tip of the iceberg. This is supposed to be an iceberg. So there's the water level here. There are many, many components underneath this that you need to consider. So we have a lot of IT professionals in here, of course. So you worry about your InfoSec statements, all your policies, your access policies. Maybe you have pen testing. You think, okay, well, that's my IT department, but it's also integrated into data protection laws. This is a requirement. Data storage, retention policies. Now these are, of course, InfoSec items, but do you know that you need to also know when to not delete documents? For example, an important one is when certain data is evidence for a lawsuit. So you have to integrate legal with the IT department to make sure that this document is not, these types of documents in these certain situations are not deleted. Network architecture. I'm sure a lot of you are excited about network architecture, but do you know that you also need to map where your data goes? You need to know where the data comes in, who has access to it, and where it goes. Skipped ahead by accident, but backup. Backup policies should incorporate encryption, pseudonymization, and of course, everyone uses cloud services, or most everyone uses cloud services. You need to have vendor agreements. Do you flag when incidents occur? Do you have procedures to when these incidents are flagged, do you know exactly what to do? For example, when there is a data breach. Employee records, records of all types, documenting your compliance. Communications. When do you have templates ready to send out? For example, when a data breach occurs, do you know what needs to be in it? When it needs to be sent? Do you know your supervisory authority in all the jurisdictions? This is supposed to be a policeman. I realize it's an airline pilot. It looks more like an airline pilot here. Maybe you've seen the signs out there, CCTVs. Do you have policies for different local jurisdictions' requirements? Do you have management discussions? Do you have trainings? Do you have audits? The number of considerations are overwhelming. Actually, there are many more, but that was a simplified list. In general, information security measures, clear notifications, governance, monitoring, maintaining compliance, proving it, which is an important one. It does no good if you have all these steps and an authority comes knocking on your door and you can't prove that you've been in compliance this whole time. And to make things even more complicated, you usually have to worry about multiple jurisdictions. So why does it matter? Well, the penalties are quite severe. GDPR, which maybe most of you know. In the EU, you have private lawsuits and administrative fines up to 20 million euros or 4% annual turnover. That basically means 4% of your gross revenues. And this is how you get fines of hundreds of millions of dollars that are imposed. The largest one to date, I believe, is almost $1 billion to Amazon. Thailand, fines are much lower, but you have criminal liability. I'm sure no one here wants to spend a year in a Thai jail over over data protection. Singapore, similar, 2 years. So where do you start? How do you get a macro level view? You start by analyzing which data protection law apply to you. Now, to be clear, this is personal data. There are other laws related to data, for example, in the financial sector or healthcare industry. We're not talking about this. We're talking about personal data. How do you know when these type of laws apply to you? In general, you need two things: subject matter scope and territorial scope. Now, this is legalese. This is like a law school class here, but let's put it in simpler terms: the types of activities that are covered by these laws and where these activities occur. So let's talk about the first one. These laws cover the processing of personal data. That's the key terms here. What does processing mean? Well, you probably say, oh, I know what processing means. Of course, in legalese, it means something that you may not realize. It's almost any activity towards creating a filing system. And what is a filing system? You got to put these pieces together. A filing system is a structured set of data accessible according to specific criteria. In other words, if you're organizing data, it's processing. Now, surprisingly, if you are deleting data, that's also processing. If you are flagging it to say we need to encrypt this data, that is also processing it. So it's basically any activity where you're doing some sort of organization to your data. If you have a stack of business cards that you collected out there, and you put one pile where you say, I need to contact these people, and the other pile you say, forget about these people, that's processing data. What is personal data? Again, you have to put the pieces together. Personal data is almost any information relating to a data subject. And a data subject is a natural person, in other words, a human being, not a dead person, not a company, who is identified or identifiable. Identified means I know it's that person. Identifiable means I have some data on some person. I don't know exactly who it is, but if I put it together with this piece and that piece, then I know who it is. All of that data, all those little pieces, are considered personal data. So in conclusion, for this first step, yes, your business almost definitely processes personal data. It is a bad argument to say, no, we don't process personal data. Companies need humans' data, your employees, your customers, and you're going to apply some sort of organization to it. So, number one, checked. But you also need territorial scope. Where are these activities being conducted? Two situations where they can apply. If you establish a controller or processor, these are legal terms again, we'll get into it, or you process the personal data of its residents. We'll get into that later. Let's talk about the first one. Establishing a controller or processor. Controller, in simplified terms, makes decisions about processing personal data. If you make the decisions about it, you're a controller. If you're a processor, if you actually do the activity. So, if you have people making decisions or doing activities within a particular country about personal data, then those laws will likely apply to you. And the word establishing is not exactly what you might think. You don't need a company. You don't need formal agreements. You just need what they call a stable arrangement, which is a much lower barrier. So, number two, if you process the personal data of residents, and if you think about this, it could be extremely broad. You have a website, and it collects cookies, and cookies, they don't have to be, but they can be personal data, right? If you can piece together to identify a human being, then it's personal data. So if you have a website and you're collecting cookies around the world, you might think, wow, am I subject to the laws of 100 countries? Well, fortunately, it is often narrowed down to two situations. If you're targeting the residents for sales, now you don't need to have money involved. If you're just targeting for offering goods and services, targeting a particular sector, that can check the box. Or if you are monitoring their behavior, if you're monitoring the behavior of people in a particular country, and what does that mean? It means typically it means you profiling them. Like, this person likes dogs, this person goes to church, this person does whatever. Then then that country's laws will apply. So now what? After you figure out which country's laws might apply to you, you have to manage your risk. Now, there are 4 things that are always a good idea. First one, oh, I'm sorry. You need to implement a strategy, and then you have to take accountability. Now let's talk about strategizing. 4 things that are always a good idea for a strategy. One is to minimize the personal data you process. We're talking not only the amount of data, but the types of data. If you don't need it, don't collect it. And the data you do collect, you must make sure you can justify the legal basis. Now, the easiest way and the safest way is consent, right? You make sure that they consent to allowing you to process personal data, but there are rules about consent. Have to be very clear, has to be segregated, has to be informed. So you can't bury it on page 3 and say we have consent. You should strategize to avoid certain countries' laws. If you're not doing business there, why are you collecting data in X country? If you have no intentions, you better, it goes with the first point, minimize personal data. If you have doubts about your compliance programs, make changes. This is an important subject. So change your personnel, change your vendors. 2 now is taking accountability. This is a long list. Put it all up together at once. You say, we've already gone through this. This was back on slide 5, I believe. These were the items we went over before. These account for all the items below the water, below the tip of the icebergs. For example, effective InfoSec measures or proving compliance. These are the components. Clear notifications, proper governance. Those are the components. If you have multiple jurisdictions, territorial-specific regulations, such as your CCTV here, these are the components. So, in summary, you need a broad understanding. You need a macro-level view of data protection so that you can implement a proper strategy. And you can take accountability as a controller or processor, and you can understand why a privacy policy is only the tip of the iceberg.